Talk, Decolonizing Our Waters. This is hosted by Black Millennials for Flint. My name is Kayla Shannon, and I am a junior at the illustrious Spelman College, an advocate for the city of Flint, and also your host. Before we get started and I let y'all free, I want to take a moment to recognize our partners. So shout out to the Environmental Defense Fund, Climate Action Campaign, Thursday Network, Greater Washington, and Urban League Young Professionals for supporting our efforts to have these important conversations. Again, tonight's focus that will be driving our discussion is decolonizing our waters. Since centuries ago, when colonizers wreaked havoc on indigenous people internationally, white supremacy has largely impacted water. From Plymouth Rock to the transatlantic slave trade, the colonization of water has proven to be the most detrimental to communities of color. Tonight, we have a panel of water warriors who have braved these stormy waters of environmental racism. So, beginning right here to my right with Jamani, can you please introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you want folks out there in social media land to know about you? And then pass it on down to the next panelist.
I'm Jamani Overby. I'm the DC Conservation Advocate for Nature Forward, and I serve in primarily Ward 7 and 8, focusing on water, electrification, and outreach and advocacy for all things environmental justice and climate justice and where it intersects. That's my personal passion. I have 5 generations back in DC of my family, so this is home, and I love the work I do, and I love my people. So I'll pass it on.
Thank you. My name is Carlton Waterhouse, and I am the director of the Howard University School of Law and Environmental Justice Center, where we provide advocacy and support for communities that are dealing with environmental justice challenges. We engage in providing comments for federal actions and rulemakings, as well as those taking place by the state that will have impacts on communities that are facing environmental challenges and hurdles. We also are focused on enabling our students to be advocates and warriors to fight the environmental fights and provide representation to communities that are in need. Passing it on to you, Mia.
Amanda Tabote of Bienvenue. Greetings to my relatives. It's an honor to be out here in Piscataway lands. I'm visiting from my ancestral homelands in what is now known as New Mexico. I'm a Hiro-Manso Tiwa tribal member, a Pueblo woman, and a water and environmental justice attorney. My work has mostly consisted of representing communities facing disparate environmental health harms and environmental racism, and has also involved representing tribal nations and defending and using their water rights in water adjudications out west.
Good evening. My name is Oyesa. I'm a Director of Community Conservation at Potomac Conservancy. Potomac Conservancy is a nonprofit based out of Silver Spring, Maryland. We are known as the region's leading clean water advocate. So we do a lot of work with the communities here to keep Potomac River clean. I'm also a founder of a nonprofit called Hope. It's a nonprofit that is started as a college student, now raises both the funds and awareness to bring clean water sources to Ethiopian rural communities.
All right. Look, we got heavy hitters today. I know y'all heard them resumes. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you all. So as we begin, Webster's Dictionary, which we recognize as a colonized reference within itself, defines colonization as the establishing of a colony or subjugation of a people or area, especially as an extension of state power. So to each of the panelists, based on your personal experiences and experiences in the field of water advocacy and activism, how do you define colonization?
I'll start?
For sure.
Okay. I will say, like, similarly that as so, but also kind of in a grouping system. So even in my work in DC, when we refer to communities in Ward 7 and 8, we refer to them east of the river. So it's like a grouping in an area of problems or issues that kind of plague our community. When I say our community, I say Black and brown communities. So I would definitely say it's like that, like it's the isolation in that sense as well.
colonization historically has been a political exploitation of people and land in order to provide benefits to another geographic region and area. And today, I think colonization for us in the environmental context may be even more aptly understood as primarily an economic exploitation, whereby a different group of people who has control of economic resources exploits land for the benefit of another group of people other than those who are primarily resident in that geographic area.
I think I would define colonization in the context of water we're talking about today as a violent, forced disconnection from the land, and by extension, a violent, forced disconnection from ourselves and who we are as people. Just to give a brief personal example, my community, my ancestors, we have lived in the Rio Grande watershed since time immemorial. A lot of our ceremonies, our cultures have evolved alongside the river, alongside that landscape. But in 1916, the state of New Mexico built the Elephant Butte Dam. So that section of the river where my community is located now no longer has access to the river. The river has been diverted. So when we do our spring ceremonies, which we just did recently, a lot of it involves going to the river, gathering sacred plants for ceremony, but we're doing that in a dry riverbed now. So I'd say when resources have been taken for the benefit of, white supremacist institution, what does it mean for who we are when we can't be with the river, access our ceremonies and our traditions that we've done all of this time? We've been cut off from that, and I think that's how I would define colonization in my personal experience as an Indigenous woman.
Yeah, I will define colonization as a possession over indigenous waters' rights, identity, and also the authority. What do we mean by those three things, right? No rights, that means that those with the power or those with the rights have a lot of accessibility to water, right? Those who doesn't have the right are always left behind, right? And then in terms of the power, for you to do something with water, you need that power, right? And then those with the power obviously have a lot of flexibilities, right? And then also, I also think of it this way. What makes us different from indigenous people are, we tend to say, what is our mine, right? What is mine when it comes to water? Where indigenous people would say, what is my responsibility, right? So look at that two different. Like today we're saying what part of it is mine, and indigenous people would say, what is my responsibility as collectively, right? So as indigenous people having, losing that possession of our water.
Thank you. And I feel like a lot of what you all touched on, the common thread being the disconnection, right? It's the marketization of what water is and these resources that really should be welcome to all of us, and that our needs for all of us have been disconnected from the communities who often need them most, and who have often had the disparities have impacted them most. And so an estimated 1 in 10 Indigenous Americans, to your point, lack access to safe tap water or basic sanitation, which results in a host of public health issues. This includes diabetes, gastrointestinal disease, and many other illnesses. Among the most affected by water issues are 30 tribes within the Colorado River Basin, or the CRB, located across California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. Reduced rainfall and droughts linked to the climate crisis are further straining supply issues caused by inadequate and aging infrastructure, legacy contaminants, insufficient technical water capacity, and limited revenue streams. Unlike cities and towns, tribes cannot raise enough money through property taxes, or cannot raise money through property taxes, as reservation lands are held in a trust by the federal government. So for Mia, can you speak to the very specific challenges with water quality issues in Indigenous communities? What radical and transformational changes are necessary to change change the trajectory of safe water scarcity for our indigenous brothers and sisters? It's a big question. So I'll go with the first part, all right? So can you speak to the specific challenges with water quality issues in indigenous communities?
Right, no, that's a really important question, and issues of water quality and quantity are inherently linked, especially in areas where we're experiencing increased drought, increased water scarcity because of climate change. But I'd say everybody wants to build oil and gas infrastructure through native lands, and nobody wants to build water infrastructure to reservations to service reservations. So that's always an irony to a lot of communities. But I'm glad you mentioned the Colorado River Basin, because that's really ground zero, I would say, for looking to the future of water scarcity in a time of increasing effects due to climate change. The Colorado River Basin was apportioned during a year of flood year, right? Any good hydrologist can tell you that river flows vary year to year. The river was apportioned, meaning the water rights were diverted out to different users during a flood year, so it was already higher than it would be normally. And I will say that it was also apportioned with the expectation in 1922 that tribes would no longer exist at some point, and that they would not need to provide water rights to those communities. Out west, we use a system called prior appropriation to distribute water rights, which maybe some of you who've been in the water world know that it's known for the saying, first in time, first in right. Basically, the first person who can use a water right, put it to what is considered to be a beneficial use, is then able to acquire that water right. Of course, what is considered to be beneficial is defined in a very narrow colonial lens. Prior appropriation was really used as a tool of colonization in order to encourage settlers to use water for agricultural purposes, ranching purposes, things that were being used to dispossess indigenous communities from the land out west. So, in terms of radical changes that are needed, I'd say it's so important for tribes to receive their water settlements. Of the tribes in the Colorado River Basin, the majority still don't have water settlements, which means that they still don't have access to the water rights that they are legally entitled to, and have been prevented from using for sometimes over 100 years at this point. I would also say I think that we're coming to a point where we're going to have to take a really hard look at the system of prior appropriation, looking at what is it incentivizing. Is this something that can continue in a time when our water resources are becoming more and more scarce? If we can turn to systems that redefine what it means to beneficially use water using, indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, saying leaving water in the river is an important beneficial use. Leaving water for those ecological functions that we all rely on needs to be something that is valued in the future. So I don't have all the answers for that complex question, but I think that's a start.
Thank you for that answer. And what I appreciate so much about indigenous practices and what I've read about indigenous communities is that prioritization of land and the understanding that we can only get from our land what we give to it, right? And so when we prioritize capital over people and over the care of the land, we ultimately are detrimentally impacting not only ourselves, but also the space that sustains us. And so I definitely appreciate and thank you for sharing that perspective. And we don't expect you to have all the answers. So I appreciate what you were able to share. The catastrophe that has occurred in East Palestine, Ohio, is another attack on water amid a number of other environmental challenges. On February 3rd, 2023, in Palestine, Ohio, a Norfolk Southern train derailed, carrying highly toxic cargo. As of Tuesday, February 21st, 2 weeks after the train derailment, Norfolk Southern reported that the chemical spill contaminated at least 1.1 million gallons of water, killing thousands of fish, and the controlled release of one of the chemicals it was carrying has prompted concern that the drinking water that nearly 5 million people rely on could be contaminated. So, extremely catastrophic. Dr. Waterhouse, describe your perspective of the EPA and Biden administration's response to this man-made disaster, and what precedents may this set for other existing polluters and haphazard corporations in the U.S.?
Thank you very much for the question. I'll begin by saying we've seen some congressional action in terms of raising the standards and expectations for what rail companies are going to have to do in terms of keeping trains from derailing, making sure that they have adequate staffing on the train, making sure that workers may be receiving the kind of leave that they need in order to take care of themselves. A number of congressional actors are now getting into this space to address this problem. I think that prevention of future derailments that are carrying hazardous chemicals is the only way to protect communities. After the fact, we just have a cleanup. And the truth is, the EPA does a good job typically when you have these kinds of derailments and they have to go out and clean them up. It happens more frequently than most of us know. They just don't happen to be as large or as visually kind of impactful to get the kind of attention. I think the Biden-Harris administration in responding to the disaster has done a good job. I think that they, in fact, have made resources available, personnel available, and they've had staff on site since the disaster happened from day one. What they could have done a better job of is communicating to the public exactly what the threats are, what the risks are, and how they were working to provide protection. And I think that occurs because it is such a part of what happens every day that they take for granted to some degree that people understand and trust that they're going to do the right thing. But I should say that one area obviously that's room for improvement is communication to the public about these kinds of issues. And the fact that communities around the country, unfortunately, have had these kinds of derailments and have these kinds of derailments, and they don't result in catastrophic problems. In this instance, we had something that was unique. In order to prevent a massive explosion that could have been harmful for people, there was the detonation, or not the detonation, but the ignition of one of the chemicals, of vinyl chloride, so that it would burn rather than explode. And so that burning produced a huge cloud and a huge plume. The alternative of an explosion, though, would put life at very, very high levels of risk, and so it was the lesser of the two evils. But what the agency has done is to make sure that there was air monitoring equipment in large supply that has been running 24 hours, 7 days a week to make sure that the level of contaminants that were in the air were not at levels that would put people at risk. What the agency has also done is create a health clinic in a very short period of time that has already seen hundreds of people who've been able to come in to talk about their concerns. So I think from the standpoint of the administration, I think they've done this the right way. They could have, as I said, done a better job of communicating, but there is one other thing that they've done that they could have done a better job of. Whenever there's a disaster, what people don't realize is from an authority standpoint, the local governments have the first level of authority to respond. And this is partially done so that we don't have federal overreach. In other words, if I'm the mayor, if I'm in charge of the local state, I don't want the federal government showing up every time there's a problem and saying we're in charge. So that means that when there is some kind of disaster, the first thing that happens is the state government that has its own state authorities is on the scene to address the problem. In this situation, the state government didn't really have the resources available to address the problem as directly as was needful. And so the agency ended up taking over this cleanup from the state with the state's agreement. But what we saw from Hurricane Katrina, as we look back in history, is that handoff between federal and state government needs to be done in a timely, a quick, and efficient way. And sometimes the agency defers so much to its state governments that it doesn't encourage them quickly enough to kind of pass the baton. And I think that's something that we see in this case, and it's something that the agency needs to work on to make sure with all the state partners that we don't have any kind of stutter steps to get that baton passed on when it needs to happen, to make sure that people can be kept safe and that the people who have the highest level of expertise are in charge. It's not that the EPA wasn't there from day one, but they weren't in charge. So their staff was on site, but the Ohio authorities were the ones who really were making the decisions.
Thank you. And I think what really stuck out there for me is when you speak about communication, because communication makes such a difference for so many people. So many community members on the ground level would have loved to hear an explanation like what you just gave, and as an immediate reaction, right? But so often community members go in the dark and are so unaware of what's happening right next to them, and it incites fear, of course, as it would, because you see this huge plume go up, or you hear about something in the news, or hear about something on social media, as people so often are nowadays, but you're not hearing anything from the officials and the people with the information that could actually put you at ease. And so that definitely makes a difference, and I'm glad that you brought attention to that, because I mean, I'm sure we all recognize the steps necessary to be made in communication between government officials and their constituencies. So, as an advocate for the city of Flint, I have seen the Flint water crisis personally impact classmates, colleagues, and many loved ones that have been impacted and will continue to be impacted for years to come. But I know that the city of Flint is not the only city that has been plagued with lead issues in water. Right here in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., there is a legacy water pollution issue with lead service lines. Many historically black cities as far back as the 1980s, like many historically black cities as far back as the 1980s, D.C. residents have been advocating for issues with lead in drinking water to be addressed. Recently, D.C. has been said to be in danger of missing their 2030 deadline to remove lead pipes. D.C. Ward 4 Council member Janice Lewis George reintroduced legislation that would require residents to remove lead pipes under their homes, but some D.C. residents are not so receptive. Jamani, as a D.C. native, what is your experience and perspective regarding the history and current state of water quality in the district, including lead and other challenges? And then as a second part, because I always have a follow-up, in your opinion, what is the gap between government agencies, elected officials, and community members?
Thank you for the question. I will start by saying, like I mentioned before, my family has like 5 generations back in DC. So when I think of water in DC, I was always told, let's not drink water, make sure you boil it before, or grab a bottle of water. As far as to now that I'm able to go out and drink, and there's cocktails in the city of murky water called DC tap water. So it's a long history, like many other cities, that we have, unclean water and unsafe water. And it's a public health issue. It's the way that environmental justice intersects with so many other issues. And I will say currently, so the city does have a self-imposed mandate that they want to remove off all lead pipes by 2030. And at this point, the city's not going to make it. So as you mentioned, a part of her Green New Deal, Councilmember Janice Lewis George, she's proposing that in this current cycle for council, so that there is not only an understanding of where the pipes are and where they're plaguing our communities, because at first we had a map that we thought understood where everything was, but there, with activists and other people and third parties doing their own research, there are more lead pipes than what we think there are. So we want government to first identify those places, and then by 2030 still expedite that process and require residents to remove their pipes. And so that's kind of what's going on in DC as it relates to lead. And then I would say also, like, not related to lead, I also do work as it relates to like our streams and our rivers and how that impacts the Chesapeake Bay. And so, there's other things that impact our waterways. There are stream restoration projects that have happened that now have to, happen again due to things that have impacted our water and causing that to be dirty. So we also in DC want to push on Somerville and Anacostia once again. So that's another thing that impacts our waterways. And then your second part of your question, I would say the disconnect. From my experiences in like canvassing in neighborhoods, I'll go talk to neighbors about, some other programs that are going on in DC, such as like their Flood Smart Home programs where you can get retrofits funded by the government to, make your house flood-proof. And, there's been many city grants and instances where you can do things like that, just like they're doing for the lead pipes. But the disconnect in like, it's like a tussle with residents, and you want them to trust the agency. You want them to have government to follow through, but there's a lot of distrust. I've communicated with residents, and it's like, well, they came down and they were supposed to fix our sewage. We decided to do it, and now we have more issues than we had before. So I think that's a really big issue. But we continue to encourage residents. We continue to try to hold agencies and government accountable, in our oversight and our performance hearings as we, continue to advocate, but also work to get them involved. Because it's nothing like hearing from, the people from your own city, from your own board, telling you this is something that is happening to me, and it means more than just, it's coming from other organizations or, larger groups.
Thank you. And that's definitely a struggle when you talk about distrust, because on one hand, of course, we want these government officials to do their job, which is to be held accountable to their constituencies and to be held accountable to the issues that are impacting their communities. But then at the same time, you have these systems that have built distrust within our communities, especially in Black and brown communities, that have so often gone unheard or attempted to receive help from those who were accountable to them and been scorned for it, or have ended up with situations worse than even where they began. How would you, if you were speaking to a DC native or any other community member who has dealt with distrust with government, like how do you have those conversations in order to help them build trust, or at least help to in some way mend that relationship?
I would say it's pretty difficult. When you go and you knock on somebody's door and you're telling them about a program that would be amazing and great, not only for your home, but also like the environmental factors that are going around in your area. I usually tell them to just try again. It may not have worked the first time, but it can work again, and there are other opportunities. But I usually try to pinpoint at that part of intersection of where things are intersect with climate and the other things that happen. So people that want to upgrade their homes and get retrofits, like think of things like that. And it might be a way of curbing what our really focus is, but if you can really connect with somebody on a level they can understand the other implications and how that will impact them, and it could be for the good.
Thank you for that. So, as I'm sure you all know, clean water is a human right, and it is not only a domestic issue, but also a global challenge. The commodification and privatization of water is among the most prevalent issues surrounding water. As many of the ancestors of those on this panel would recognize, water should not be a source of monetary gain, but should be used for the sheer purpose of sustaining life. Just like the Lakota phrase, water is life. Weyesa, as a successful advocate and activist having a global, local, and national perspective, what has been your approach regarding clean water advocacy and activism? Share some of your victories and challenges in this work, especially as it relates to standing up against major water polluters.
Yes, I can speak up from two perspectives here. I guess from two different sides of it. One is from the work that I do in Ethiopia, and then the other work that I do here. So as you can see, I'm focused on two different communities, back at home, and then also here in my own community. So I always start by asking myself, like, if I have water, what can they have too, right? So I grew up in a small rural village in southern Ethiopia. I've lost family members due to waterborne bacteria. You probably wonder why I started a nonprofit that build a water well at home. I always start by asking myself, why can't everybody else have access to simple, clean drinking water? So hospitality has been a big part of my culture growing up, where, even if you have one bite, you have to share it first. And so there's lack of water rights over there as well, because of the amount of resources that's available to us. And those with the right resources have access to that clean water, right? And we who grew up in a small village, traveling hours to get clean water was a drug, right? Sometimes we don't even have time to travel, especially young girls. Women travel so many miles just to get simple, clean drinking water. And so when we don't have the time to actually go collect those drinking water for hours, we tend to rely on what's in our backyard, such as a pond or a river, right? And that creates like health issues, right? And so that's one of the reasons why, I took that approach of bringing clean water, by engaging communities here in the U.S. and then funding and raising the funds and awareness to bring clean water to my village. Here, working with Potomac Conservancy, there is a belief that healthy, sustainable community starts with clean water, right? And we have the water, but we need to protect it, right? It's not just a Potomac Conservancy's, job. It's collective effort, right? There is my favorite quote: "If you want to go far, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together," right? So most of the work I do at Potomac Conservancy is engaging the community, connecting the community to these national treasures, right? We host shoreline trash cleanups. We bring out communities of Black, Indigenous people of color to come out and paddle with us during the summer. We're very affordable. Most of them are free. That's one of the ways that we engage in the community. We say, this is your river. Let's protect it together, right? Those have been my two approach, and I love working for Potomac Conservancy because there's a belief that everybody deserves to get connected to this water, right? So those have been my approaches, and obviously all the victories here. There's no downside of it. Some of the challenges, obviously, starting my nonprofit was, convincing people to believe me. Their stories I'm telling, right? I'm coming from, small rural villages where I've lost families, and I know exactly what the struggle of, getting clean water is like. And just convincing people here is difficult, right? There's no way for me to capture all that struggles, but just to tell them this is what's happened. I grew up with this. Believe me, right? That is the only challenge for me, but other than that, all victories.
All right, I appreciate that. And something that stuck out for me is the idea of reframing it from, and you spoke about this for a moment, Mia, reframing from me to we, from not what is mine, but what is ours and our responsibility. And it's such a struggle, especially in Western society and Western philosophy, because the entire foundation of our capitalist nation is built on ownership, right? It's built on mine versus yours, us versus them, right? But it's through that reframing and understanding our collective needs, right? Because these things, and we saw this with COVID, right? Like COVID was not waiting to see us versus them or me versus you, right? It spread equally. And in the same way with these climate disasters and water disasters, it will impact all of us together and collectively. And so that definitely stuck out for me, the importance of reframing the discussion from mine and yours to ours and collective use. And not only that, but Mia taking it a step further to not only to really say it's none of ours, right? And that this land is something that really we should honor. And as a part of our honor, we take care of it, right? And we return to it all that it gives to us. And so thank you so much for offering that insight. Mia, coming right back over to you. Can you also share some powerful lessons that we can learn from Indigenous and tribal nations regarding community activism surrounding the fight for clean water?
That's a good question. So in 2021, I spent some time at an encampment that was opposing the construction of the Line 3 pipeline up in Anishinaabe territory, Ojibwe territory, Minnesota. I think one of the lessons that I took away from that time is I arrived at the camp a couple days after construction was finished underneath the stretch of the river where the encampment was located. And in the work that we do, we all have moments like that where often hear, I was taught by elders in this work that we're working for the next 7 generations. We're not working just for ourselves, and to kind of reframe that time scale is often helpful for me, because if you think back to what our ancestors went through, what that time scale looks like, we are part of something bigger, and we may not see the fruit of our labor necessarily in our lifetime, but what we're doing still matters, and it's something that we're doing for our descendants and for the next 7 generations. If we can hold that scale, that often helps me in moments where I feel a little bit hopeless in the moment. So.
Some activists would argue that we can never expect the government, whether it be local, state, or federal, to do the right thing about water, because these very same structures are largely what got us into our current water troubles. From a generational standpoint, Gen Z, my generation, and millennials are largely disengaged and completely distrustful of government, but it's tough because all rules and regulations are established by elected officials and government agencies. So this is sort of getting back to that conversation of distrust and disengagement. Jumani, and to all of our panelists, how can we keep youth and young adults encouraged to use their voices and to demand that the people we put in office and folks whose salaries are paid out of our tax dollars stop colonizing our waters once and for all? Please, go ahead.
Oh, no.
Okay. I would say, so I guess I'll speak from a standpoint based on some of the work that I do in with Nature Forward. I want to say I am partnered with a project with the Green Scheme and the Well at Oxen Run with DC Greens, called the Wording Water Watchers program, or Wording Water Watchers project, where we really just Nature Forward itself, we want people to enjoy, protect, and learn about nature. And through all of those aspects, we do that in the Wording Water Watchers program. We engage people to learn about the water, the park, the stream, how it impacts them, love on it, clean it up. We do so many different activities. We have one on Saturday too. But I mean, what I see when working with community members and working with all ages, honestly, we go from like a family standpoint where we try to engage the whole family and having events when everybody can show up, not at 9 a.m. when everybody's at work. So sometimes it is hard. It is very hard to think about how we're going to engage our younger generations in advocacy and work. But it's not that people don't want to do it. I don't think. I really think it's a matter of meeting them where they are. And like I kind of said before, pinpointing the intersectionality of a lot of the issues of environmental justice. Sometimes certain things aren't first priority as a sense, but when it comes to things that are financial or something like that you can kind of jerk at people's hearts that impact them or their health of their children. And that's how people get engaged and want to come to the water and want their children to know about the water, and how they can have job opportunities that are focused in environmental justice and landscaping, architecture and design. Like, there's so many intersections of where that love and that passion for environmentalism will be, and it's already natural, it's already within us, it's ancestral. And so it's that there, but then it's connecting people to resources. So I've seen some of our Wording Water Watchers ambassadors become like tree ambassadors for other organizations, and want to do nitrogen oxide demonstrations to get people to electrify their homes. And and they're like 20 years old, and they're like, yeah, they're going to come in my house and let's do this, and I want to teach my mom about this. And a lot of young people, they are the knowledge, the new knowledge that comes into their homes. So when we meet them where they are and where they can get excited about something, they're going to power up and protect nature, just like our younger generations did not too long ago, and leading a lot of our movements.
Well, one thing I would say is I think education is really huge, but education about our role and responsibility as members of these communities. And I think, as an advocate, it's very easy for me to point fingers at people other than myself who are the problem. the government is the problem. The corporations are the problem. But the truth of the matter is, we don't live in a society that's a dictatorship. We don't live in a society that's a totalitarian government. We live in a society where we actually get to pick the leaders. We actually get to go and make comments about rules that are going to be made. We actually get to go into the streets and have protests to demand change. And so, but if we're not doing that, if we're not actually engaged to require those changes, if we don't connect ourselves to the water, in other words, I want the water to be clean in my tap, but if it's not, what am I going to do about it? Complain and go right along, right? And the time we spend in our day reflects the values that we have. So if our values are not connected to the things that we say are important, then it really causes us to ask questions about what we really do value. And I think helping young people to make that association about how they spend their day and how they spend their money and what they do and how it relates to how they live their lives and what they experience is a critical part for us having a group of warriors who will go out and be the kind of advocates and the kind of leaders who produce the outcomes that we all really want people to see.
Yeah, I really like Tony's point about meeting them where they are. I feel like, we can all recognize that these systems were not made for us, were not made with us in mind, but I think it's a really powerful thing to be able to nevertheless use them in a way that benefits our communities, or at the very least can serve as an important form of harm reduction while we do other organizing, while we do other work to build new systems and new ways of being. So, I think that there's lots of ways to show up in this work. Working within the system is one way to do that and an important way to do that. But for those who are maybe more cynical, I'd say it takes the movements that we're all a part of. There's a lot of different roles that you can take up. We need artists, we need musicians, we need, community organizers. So I'd say, we don't have to limit ourselves to one role. There's a lot of different ways that we can get involved and make changes. And I think it's exciting to see the young people doing that.
Yeah, at Potomac Conservancy, we activate our community through a lot of ways. One being kind of building a peer-to-peer leadership program. This is where we connect with young adults, millennials in the area who are passionate to just go beyond just doing riverside cleanups on Saturday morning. They want to get engaged with the community. They want to make impact, right? So those are the type of people that we call like community champions. We train them. They become part of our organization. They become part of a team where they find out it's a fun event, right? It's very affordable. They see it as a very enjoyable. It's a way for us to connect them to the river. And then from there, we think about how can we convert them to taking action, right? So we're giving them with all the opportunities, and then we ask them, like, hey, do you care about the river? Let's take action for it together, right? So those are some of the ways that we've been approaching, and we want to continue to grow our community champion to continue to take action with us. And so that way the whole community will become activated and continue to take care of our river.
Thank you. And there are a couple things that stuck out for me. I'll ask myself the question as a representative of my generation. No, but I definitely a couple things that stuck out for me are, one, meeting people where they are, right? And it's this idea that so often, as I spoke to, young youth are disengaged because they're unheard, right? They show up in these rooms and it's like, you want my insight, I offer my insight, but then I don't know what I'm talking about because I'm too young and I'm too naive and you don't even have all the context to really even know what you're talking about, right? Or it's like you offer me, you want me in the room as a data point to say that you surveyed me, to say that you got my information, to say that I was there, to say that I was at the table, but there's nothing that actually really comes. I don't see anything resulting from my being in the room other than the fact that I was just there. Or that oftentimes young people are put in the room and put in a place to say, you're here, to soak up all of the knowledge and information that I have to offer you, and not recognizing that young people have so much insight that they can offer, right? They have different perspectives and different ways of looking at things that sometimes by having all of the knowledge and the information in the world, you end up this close to an issue and you don't even realize that the answer is right next to you, right? Because you've been looking at it this way, or you've been taught to look at it this way for so long. And so I appreciate saying, meet them where they are, right? And that if you want them in the room, pull them into the conversation, pull them into the action of what's actually occurring, not just to be here to say that they're in the room, to say that you involve young people, that you involve youth, but to say that, no, this is actually, you're contributing something to, and I value your opinion, I value you being here. And let them make the TikTok about it. You know? Like, that's a part of the movement today, okay? We spent a whole year and a half on TikTok getting all of our social engagement from online, and now you cannot tell me that my TikTok is not a part of the movement, all right? So you truly do, though. Like, if the TikTok is what's going to get them to show up, then make a TikTok with them, right? Make it something that we can understand, that I can really, I'm excited, I want to show up, because I know when we get there, it's going to be lit. Like, it's going to be a party, you know? So I definitely appreciate that, is this idea of not just having them right there, right? But meeting them where they are, and drawing them in. And then I will also add, as a second part, we gotta vote, y'all. We gotta vote, y'all. Because as we all know, our youngest bracket votes the least across demographics, and it's so important that we recognize the importance of showing up, because politicians, part of the reason these government officials aren't recognizing and working on the issues that we care about is because we're not the constituency they're worried about, right? They're not worried about the people who are at the end of the day aren't going to show up to the ballot, because you don't impact their ability to be in the position again. They are worried about the people who may or may not vote them out, which is why you saw people taking action when we started saying vote them out, because they was like, hold on, wait a minute. I'm gonna lose my seat, let me do something, right? So we have to be willing to show up, and even though, like you said, even though these systems haven't always worked for us, we have to try again. We have to try again. We have to be willing to get up and go again, because our descendants are depending on us. Our communities are depending on us to show up for them. So, as we're ending out, I can't believe we're ending. It's been so good. It's been so good. But we've come to the end of another amazing Green Table Talk. Thank y'all so much for offering all of the insight that you have. And before we leave, I'd like to wrap up with a final call to action from each and every one of y'all. If they didn't hear anything else, which hopefully y'all heard everything else, but if they didn't hear anything else, what do you want our audience to leave with? Don't all jump at once.
So I'll say water is life. We need water to sustain ourselves. We can't go without water. And because of that, we have to act to protect water, and protect it in all the different ways: music, art, speaking, bathing, drinking, but elevate it in your life in a way that makes sure that you know what you have to do to protect it for yourself and for others who are in need.
I was going to say water is healing in that sense. We talk about like ancestral and our descendants, and continuing to show up and continue to do the work, even in a sense of just continue to be resilient. So I just challenge everybody to continue to be resilient in that way. We've been known to lay down our burdens by the riverside, but we also need to take care of that riverside as well, so that we can continue to do that. So that's what I would leave everybody with.
I'd say filter your tap water. No. Most places, but I would say, we've spent a lot of time talking about the commodification of water and how the commodification of water allows us to think of it as a separate entity from other things in an ecological system that is, actually connected to us. our bodies are mostly made out of water. So I'd say all of us rely on water, drink water, think about the river as a whole. Think about it as a watershed, think about where it's coming from, what other plant and animal relatives are relying on the water, other things that could be impacting the water, and really start interacting with it as a relative and as an entity that is a part of us too.
Yeah, water is life, and without water, there'll be no life, right? We all should have the right to water, and no one should be left out, right? So speaking for what is right is the way we should be putting out our voice, right? Speaking for what's right, and then be the voice for our water as well, which is your water. It's not somebody's water, but if you have a power, use it. Encourage to not abuse it. And then most importantly, let's think the way we usually think, right? Just like our indigenous people, let's think about what is our responsibilities instead of what is mine, right? What belongs to me? Instead of saying what belongs to me, let's talk. Let's think about what is our responsibilities.
All right, well, give them a round of applause. Once again, thank you so much to each and every one of you all for joining us. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for being willing to share your knowledge and insight with our community. Thank you to everybody out there in social media land for joining us. You can join us here not every other. I'm thinking of my other job, y'all. But you can join us here once a month, the fourth Thursday of every month at 6 p.m. Here in person or virtually, and we'll see you next time.